state legislative districts whereby the people in power are able to choose their voters rather than the voters choosing who it is that's going to represent them. And I've said this before, both Democrats and Republicans in the past have engaged in political gerrymandering. There's no perfectly clean hands here. But what has changed is we have seen over the last decade or two, the Republican Party in particular embracing this particular strategy with great gusto and little shame. Such that, right now in Congress, generally speaking, Democrats have to win 4 or 5% extra votes just to get this representation that they would normally get if there was just a fair, nonpartisan, allocation of seats.
Most veterans think buying a home without a large down payment is impossible. But with the VA loan experts at Veterans United, it's not. Just like helping your kids with math isn't impossible. Say carry the one.
Carry the one, honey.
Veterans United. We turn heroes into homeowners.
And that's what NDRC was founded on, was to fight that particular pernicious strategy of weakening people's votes. And that is still going, and it is going to be going even more fiercely in this upcoming redistricting if we don't provide the NDRC the resources that it needs to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, I want to add the third thing, which this part is new. Even with voter suppression efforts, even with political gerrymandering, the one thing that we hadn't seen before, that we kind of counted on, was the notion, well, at least the votes will actually be counted and some objective, nonpartisan body, whether it's a board of election or a secretary of state working with various civil servants, et cetera, they'll count all the ballots up. And regardless of whether that person is a Democrat or a Republican, there's enough oversight, there's enough, bipartisan observers to make sure that at the end of the day, once the votes are cast, they'll be counted properly, they'll be certified, and we then declare a winner and we move on. And in this election, what we saw was my successor, the former president, violate that core tenet that we count the votes and then declare a winner, and fabricate and make up a whole bunch of hooey. And rather than supporting the Secretary of State of Georgia or the commission in Arizona that had done the counting and performed their duties properly, et cetera, what you saw was Republican elected officials all side with the president out of fear, I guess, leave many of these folks who were Republicans themselves and who were just doing their jobs hanging out to dry. And as you describe, Eric, what's been called the big lies suddenly gains momentum. And now what we're seeing is some of these state legislatures saying, you know what, we're going to take power out of the hands of these relatively nameless, faceless, objective referees. We're going to take their ability to just count votes and certify votes out of their hands. And we're going to take it upon ourselves as partisan, politicians to decide whether we think an election is fair or not. So that as bad as January 6th was, if we had a repeat in future elections in which, let's say, the Republican-controlled Pennsylvania legislature decided we're not going to certify all those votes coming out of Philadelphia because we think that those urban votes are shady. Imagine what would have happened. We would have had a worse constitutional crisis than we did. And part of what we're also seeing, by the way, is, and this is a little more blatant than we've seen in the past, legislature saying we're going to have one set of rules for oversight in, let's say, Atlanta, and another set of rules for the rest of Georgia. Now, what distinguishes Atlanta? I don't know. I guess there are more people there. What else? Yeah, I'll leave it to your imaginations to determine what exactly is going on there. Here's the bottom line. If we don't stop these kinds of efforts now, what we are going to see is more and more contested elections, contested not in the sense of healthy competition, but contested in terms of who wins, who loses. We are going to see a further delegitimizing of our democracy. And not only are we going to see more unfairness in terms of results and who is represented and who isn't, but we are going to see a breakdown of the basic agreement that has held this magnificent democratic experiment together all these years. And the only thing that's preventing that from happening is our sense of urgency and our willingness to do everything we can to prevent it. And that is going to require resources. That's going to require people paying attention. It's going to require public education. It's going to require us speaking out. I have every confidence that Nancy, working in conjunction with Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and the others, and including people like Joe Manchin, are going to figure out a way in which there is an up and down vote on the For the People Act. But that's only going to happen if we create an environment in which everybody knows what the stakes are. And that's why support for NDRC is so absolutely vital. As I argued before the vote on Senate Bill 1 as amended by Joe Manchin, I didn't think that was a particularly shouldn't have been a particularly controversial bill. It was one in which Joe Manchin went out of his way to try to find compromise with Republicans. I think it is entirely appropriate for Republicans to say that we want to scrutinize every aspect of this bill. We have our own proposals to make sure that elections are fair. We're not going to just trust that the Democrats have our interests at heart in this. I think that's entirely appropriate. What you can't do, what the Republicans can't with a straight face claim, is that after we saw January 6th, after you justified what culminated in January 6th by suggesting that, our voters don't feel like this vote is legitimate and we think there are all these questions that have to be answered and we're suspicious, et cetera. Well, you can't then say, all right, well, let's do something about it. And then they say, no, we don't want to talk anything about that. That can't be right. And what we can't also allow Republicans to say is the only kind of voting we think is fair is when our voters, or who we think are our voters, are allowed to vote, and those who we think are not going to vote for us are not allowed to vote. That also can't be the answer. That can't be fair. We have to challenge that basic premise, and we have to publicize and make sure that the American people understand the stakes. You guys are helping us do that. I'm grateful for you, and I will do anything I can to make sure that we keep pushing this boulder up the hill until we get there. So thank you, both of you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for those remarks. Before we turn to questions here,